Well, welcome to a Balticon reading with four of us here and cookies. Anyone who wants to, please come up and have cookies from Baccaro. Cookies from Baccaro's Little Italy for everyone here to keep you awake as we drone on.
They're very good cookies.
As we drone on. Anyway, we've been told we should do this alphabetically. I guess that is the official professional way that one does a reading. So me, being Scott Edelman, will begin. So I'm going to first tell you about the reading that I will not be giving you, because we each are dividing up the hour. I had two stories come out in the last month. I will read from one and just tell you about the other, because I did a reading of one of them already at a different convention. I have a story in Chiral Mad, a horror anthology that just came out last month. Lots of wonderful stories in there, but I did a reading of it at the World Fantasy Convention last year in Saratoga Springs, and the first half of that story is on YouTube, on the YouTube channel, so if you want to get spooked out, you can just go listen to that there, and I don't have to bother you here. Since this is more science fiction convention, I'm supposed to read a science fiction story. So the science fiction story that came out last month is in a magazine, bookazine called Postscripts. It's from PS Publishing in the UK. I published 5 stories with them over the years. They go across all genres, fantasy, science fiction, and horror. And this particular one has the second longest title that I've ever put on a story, and don't ask me for the longest one, because even I can't remember without it being written down. The title of this story is "The Man Without the Blue Balloon and the Woman Who Had Smiles Only for Him." I'm only going to read part of it to you, but this is more a science fiction one. So, on the day Velma returned to the city where she'd been born and where she knew she would eventually die, she climbed slowly to the top of the tallest building she could find, climbed because the electricity to power elevators was long gone, slowly because the contagion had already begun to weaken her, and entertained herself there by crawling carefully onto a ledge, staring down on streets devoid of people, and imagining what it all looked like in the days before the world began to end. Her time was short, she knew, but she also knew she was lucky to have any time left at all. So she made the best of it, letting her legs dangle freely. To her left, she set a dented can of nuts she'd scavenged. To her right, the first bottle of soda she'd come across in months. There was no pop when she unscrewed the cap, not that she'd expected one, for there to be fizz remaining in the world of any kind was probably too much to ask. She placed the cap beside her, then flicked it into the void. Watching through her boots as it made its long, slow arc to where it bounced on the street below, she was surprised she could bear to track its progress. How could she not fear as she looked out that she would fall and follow? Heights had frightened her when she'd been young, thanks to many a tumble from trees and ladders, and then the fall from that garage roof, which had set her to thinking, no more, I should stop this now. But that was yesterday and long ago, and in recent weeks her solitary life had been visited by one such surprise after another. Why reject this one? So up there in the now, high in a building she only dimly remembered and which she'd never before dared ascend, she peered calmly onto the streets far below, fantasizing about what had been lost and what she could never have back. That constant worry of falling she'd owned before the world had gone to hell was absent. She felt it lift as she'd walked the world, with stumbles rarely occurring, and when they had, never leading to falls. She didn't know why, which was, in part, what had drawn her to seek out what once would have seemed a perilous perch. She popped a stale cashew, sipped the flat cola, tested herself by looking at the distant tops of cars and lampposts, and wondered. It was more than just that heights had suddenly become bearable. It had been weeks since she'd felt any sort of fear at all, except for that one fear, the fear of her final breath, against which there was no protection. She explained this unexpected sense of freedom by telling herself that after all that had gone down with the world, maybe she simply no longer gave a damn. But she was too tired from surviving that fear, too weak from the journey to get here, to a city she'd abandoned but which now seemed somehow important, to spare much thought to arriving at anything resembling a solid conclusion. With the pain of hunger banished a bit, and with a surprising feeling of peace, she looked down and made the overgrown streets. She looked down and made the overgrown streets empty, then made the empty streets full. It had been a long time since she'd seen another human being, or even evidence that others still shared her journey, so she hoped this was a game which would help her feel less lonely. She needed to feel less lonely. At first, as she let her eyes unfocus and her mind run free, the figures were mere dreams and fog, porous as memory, but then they became outlines and finally something more. Something summoned out of memory and loneliness and need, and perhaps as well by the toll taken on her mind due to the many weary months behind her. So hallucinating, if that's what it was, she hoped she wasn't fooling herself and considering it daydreaming, was easy. There, a man walking happily as he tugged the blue balloon along a few feet above his head. He scanned the street before him in search of what? A date he wished to impress with his whimsy? His child being brought by his wife, coming to join them during his lunch break? And there, a woman, eyes straight ahead, walking briskly, doing her best to ignore those calling to her in ways she obviously abhorred. Velma could see it. Why could her haranguers not? The woman kept reaching into her shoulder bag, then withdrawing her hand. What was it she was considering? And what was it she was denying? And over there, two teenage boys laughing and taking up more sidewalk than that to which they were entitled. They were brash until they spotted an older man shuffling along, and then suddenly they fell silent. Of what were they reminded? By what had they been admonished? Her vision did not linger long enough for her to see the answer to those or any other similar questions brought about by the inhabitants of this suddenly teeming city below. The people who most attracted her attention vanished around a corner and past the outer edges of her imagination, and she suspected she'd never learn their fates, at least not that day. It bothered her not to know how their stories would end, but not enough for her to force those endings into being before her. And she was too tired just then to crawl along the ledge and around the corner to join them and see what they'd get up to next. It was enough during that moment to lean back against the cool ground and know her own ending, one which she had been taught was inescapable, and which by then she was sure wasn't that far off. And I will stop there. And sure, go ahead. And as to what the title ends up meaning, The Man Without the Blue Balloon and the Woman Who Had Smiles Only for Him, for that you will have to get a copy of Postscripts from PS Publishing, a UK publisher who has been very kind to me. The British editors have been so nice to me over the years. So anyway, thank you very much. And in this break before the next speaker, those who came in should know I brought cookies from Vaccaro's in Little Italy, so come and grab a cookie if you'd like to raise that sugar level before the next reader.